All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to broker compliance training. Today, we're going to go over the RPA. Before we get started, we're going to do a little bit of a housekeeping today and just go over some of the guidelines and some changes and amendments that we're making to the broker compliance. So I believe everyone in here is in coaching or productivity launch coaching with Leslie. So Leslie and I, after having met and going over some of the new graduation requirements, which may or may not apply to existing agents, but starting soon and rolling out, there will be requirements to move out of launch coaching. So the goal is to make sure that all of the agents are well informed, well prepared, that we have this immersive training experience, and that by the time you're done with launch, you're confident with the residential purchase agreement, that you're confident with all the disclosures, and we've done our job, and I've done my job as the broker in informing you and educating you on all of these contracts. First, we're going over some of the guidelines and compliance. Make sure you have your camera on. Understandable if you can't the entire time, but just be sure that you are here to participate. We don't want agents that are setting up their logging on Zoom and then not and then not attending. And so just be sure that if it can't be on the entire time, a majority of the time, that you are present and available. Be prepared, ready to learn. Come with some questions. If you have any questions, especially this. So most of you agents are brand new agents starting out. Majority of your first couple of deals will be buyers. And so learning how to write the residential purchase agreement and what all the terms mean is really important. Once you master that, and it'll gain confidence because your clients are going to ask you these questions and you'll be able to efficiently answer all of these questions. And so that's really the goal of this. And lastly, we go over different types of offers. Okay. So I talk about VA offers, FHA offers, conventional offers, cash offers. However, this isn't a template or a one size fits all, because depending on the property, depending on the particular market, the buyer, it can change. And so just be sure when I go over all of the different items and paragraphs within the RPA, they don't apply necessarily to every offer. So just be aware of that. Be sure to ask your coach, and you'll strategize with the coach on, hey, should we leave this in the contract? Lisa said I should add this in, but I don't think so. I don't know your particular buyer or situation. So take what I say. You don't necessarily need to apply everything unless it's a rule or a law or something that I'm saying, hey, you have to absolutely add this in. If there is something that your client does not want to add in or something different to the contract, please be sure you can ask me. Feel free to shoot me an email, send me a text message just for clarification. You can feel free to stop me during training and clarify, but just be sure that anything that I say here, make sure and double check with either myself or with your coach to see if it applies to that particular contract that you're writing, because it could not apply. If I go over an FHA transaction and you're writing all cash, some of the terms may be different, strategy may be different. So just keep that in mind. So with that being said, do we have any questions on this? No? Okay. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, we're going to hop right into the RPA. And I'll go over, like I mentioned, I'll go over the basics that actually need to be filled out. And then we'll discuss. And if you have any questions during the training, feel free to come off mute and just ask the question, and we will go from there. Okay, so date prepared, click there. It automatically populate the current date. Be sure to add in the date prepared there. The buyer, let's see, we'll have it be a guy. So let's see, John Buyer. Property address. Now, what you can do is when you do formulate the offer, and I didn't do it here for the sake of time, but you can have your go into your car forms. You can have it link your MLS. So you put the MLS listing number in. You can put the MLS, you can link it to your MLS, get the listing number, put it in, it'll automatically populate and pull all of the information over to the RPA. So you add it in, you click on the specific property, and everything will pop up, including the listing agent. The listing agent brokerage comes over. The license does. The only thing that doesn't transfer for some reason, I don't know why, is the seller's brokerage firm license number. So that doesn't transfer. So just be sure that if you are using that feature where it automatically populates and pulls over, then be sure to add in the license number because that will need to be filled out as well. So we'll go ahead. I'm gonna do. Okay, let's do Elk Grove. Okay. Um, so the property, the street, city, county, zip code, and APN need to be filled in here. Be sure that all of that information is filled in. You can pull this off of MLS. What I like to do when I write an offer is I have this up on my computer, but I also have the MLS listing with all the information on as well. That way I can reference back if needed. So it just makes it easier. I do double check everything. I make sure that the information that is being auto-populated is all filled in, that something's not missed, because although technology is fantastic, it can sometimes not be as reliable as we need it to be. So going down here, seller's brokerage firm, representing the seller only, or if you have the listing and you're representing both the buyer and seller as a dual agent, that box would be marked. If it's just a listing, then it would be that the listing agent or the listing brokerage is just representing the seller, and then we would be just representing the buyer. So we'll do, okay, that's the real estate brokerage. And these are either old or not real. So don't take any of the information I'm filling in is not a true street or true APN or true company. So, okay. And then seller's agent is listing agent. Actually, I don't want to confuse you guys. So let's see. Let's see. Julie Jackson. So seller's brokerage. So the listing agent would be first class real estate SD, seller's agent, listing agent. So they use these interchangeably. It's not across the board. It would make it a lot easier if it was, but seller's brokerage firm is the listing firm. Seller's agent is the listing agent. It's one and the same. Same thing. It gets a little bit confusing because when we go to send this out, buyer's brokerage firm, and we're also known as the selling agent. So it gets a little bit confusing. Selling agent, buyer's agent are one and the same. Seller's agent and listing agent are the same thing. So they're used interchangeably. Confusing, I know. So if you get a little bit confused there, that's the reason why. Okay, brokerage firm. So okay. And I should know this offhand, but what our brokerage number is, give me just a second. It is 0148. There we are. That is actually our brokerage license number. Okay. So if you want to jot that down, you can keep track of it there. Okay. And then this is mine. Okay. So Keller Williams Realty, California Premier, that is our license number. You as the buyer's agent, your name and your license number here. In the rare occasion that more than one brokerage represents the buyer or the seller, then you would have to mark that here. So if you were co-representing a buyer, which we've had it happen recently. An agent referred a buyer out to a different area. The buyer decided to come back to the area. So it was this kind of weird area and the county overlapped. They wanted to still work together. And so they are now co-buyer's agent. So it doesn't happen often. Typically, the referral fee, it can happen in that rare instance you would use that. But this is just, I'm going over the customary things that typically happen in a transaction. And so typically, listing agent here, buyer's agent here. If you have the listing and represent the buyer, then you would mark there, both the buyer and seller, dual agency. Okay. Is everyone following so far? Perfect. Okay. Purchase price. That's the offer price. And this will go into discussion with your coach, with the client, discussing strategy. So whatever the purchase price that you decide on, we'll go here. Strategy, again, close of escrow date, depending on the market. Standard is 30 days. So a standard, that is a good amount of time on a standard market, 30 days. Any longer than 30 is considered a longer escrow. Anything shorter is considered, more of an aggressive close date. And so, when the market is a seller's market and buyers need to close quickly and make their offer more attractive or close sooner, then you can shorten that close of escrow date. Standard's 30 days, or you can pick a particular date. Normally, it's 30 days or shorter, depending on your client, the situation, their financing, if they need more time to close, if it's contingent on the sale of their property, what have you. So purchase price here, close of escrow date, expiration of offer. We typically don't fill that out. You leave it blank. It expires automatically 3 calendar days after the buyer signs it, delivers. On the rare occasion, so I will use this, and I have used this, if my buyer is like, I really want this house. I know they're looking at other offers. There's other showings, and my clients are writing a phenomenal offer. So we're doing a shortened close, maybe a 2-week close or a 21-day escrow. Maybe it's over list price and they really want it. We'll do something like this. We give them until 5 p.m. on, let's say, tomorrow. You have tomorrow, I'm sitting in today, you have tomorrow at 5 p.m. to review the offer. If not, it's going to expire. So that puts a little bit of heat on the listing agent. They're like, wow, we better accept this or they're going to walk. And I've used that strategy when they really are, when they're like, look, we need a property. We are, I've used this recently. We need a property. We are military family. We need to get into something quickly. We really want this house. We're going to write an aggressive offer. We have full approval. We can close in 2 weeks. Tell them to take it, or let's go look at other houses. Okay, no problem. And so I've used that. It's not typical, but on that rare kind of instances when we use it, aside from that, 3 calendar days. So when clients always ask, and they will ask you this too on the offer, how long do we have? How long? When will we know something? Because clients are always anxious, right? They send in an offer and they're like, okay, when are we going to know? That's your answer right there. 3 calendar days. It will expire after 3 calendar days if they haven't accepted the offer. Initial deposit. Not 50,000. I've seen lower, $1,000 earnest money deposit. 1% is more in the standard range of what the earnest money deposit is. Some will ask for more of an earnest money deposit. The reason why is it can potentially be non-refundable if the buyer has removed all contingencies, contractually signed off that yes, they want to move forward, and then they decide to cancel later on, then that deposit could be non-refundable. So this is essentially reserving it for the buyer, because the seller doesn't have there's no cancellation clause with this. The seller is going into contract. Once they sign this and they accept the offer, once they sign the acceptance that the offer is accepted, sellers do not have an out. So they cannot cancel the agreement for any reason unless the buyer doesn't perform. So this is the buyer saying, hey, here's some consideration. We want to reserve this contract contingent on financing, property condition. Let's do our investigations. And so, yes, we're putting some skin in the game. You're not wasting your time, because essentially the buyer could tie up the property and the seller is left with no recourse and no way out, and the buyer could walk for any reason and they don't lose any money. So it's not really fair to the seller to have this property be on hold for up to 17 days. They're losing time, they're losing money, they're losing other potential buyers because buyer has now put an offer on this property and now it's no longer available. So what it's doing is saying, yes, we do want it. And so this amount is significant because it could be the amount that they could potentially lose. And so if they put 1,000 in, some buyers could lose 1,000. 5,000, they might think twice about non-performance. 2%, 3%, they're probably going to be a lot more diligent with their performance, just based on this amount. So because they're out that money. So they physically hand it over. Escrow has that money now. So they're holding on to that money. That applies, you know, towards their down payment or closing costs, etc., or the purchase price of the home. But that amount is out of their pocket that they no longer have access to. So deposit here, typically 1%, again, up or down. Loan amount. So the loan amount is going to be based on the type of property. FHA, does anybody know the amount of a down payment required percentage of a down payment for an FHA loan?
3.5%.
Perfect. Okay. So that makes our loan amount here for 82,500. All right. 96.5%. So that's our loan amount. And then we'll click here, FHA. This, again, you can use this template as a FHA, but it does not necessarily, if you go to write an offer for conventional tonight, don't use this because this is FHA, okay? But the point is the loan amount needs to be based on whatever percentage they're putting down. That amount you get from their pre-approval letter. So when you get the pre-approval letter from the lender, if it's a conventional 20% down, that amount is going to be a little bit different. Let's say it's 20% down. So that is a loan amount of 400,000. So let's do that for the sake of this. Okay. And I didn't mark FHA. Okay. So conventional, or if it's checked, FHA, VA, seller financing, other. Typically, we use, standard FHA, VA. Seller financing isn't very common. You might come across it, but not very often. The reason these forms here have an option is once you click them, additional disclosures attached to them. So the FVAC will attach to the VA form because that requires the seller. It gives an appraisal contingency, an additional appraisal contingency, saying, hey, based on this, the VA will not allow you to finance over this amount. So it's requiring, it has that extra layer of protection for the VA, and then same thing here with the FHA. So additional forms will attach once you click on them. Okay, and then here we have this little caveat here, FHA or VA check, deliver a list of lender required repairs within 17 days. So FHA and VA do have an extra layer of requirements. Okay, the reason why is the bank could potentially be Bank of America or Wells Fargo. That's the name of the lender. FHA is not the lender. FHA and VA are insuring that. So if the person defaults and they have an FHA loan, they are saying, okay, Wells Fargo, we're going to pay the debt of this person who's defaulting. And so they will say, okay, since it's essentially going to be our property that we're insuring, we need to make sure that it's free of active infestation, there's no termites, and there's no dry rot, or we need to make sure that it meets these health and safety requirements. And so that is why there's an extra layer when they're doing FHA or VA, because they are ensuring that the borrower is going to pay that debt. If they don't pay the debt, then the bank is off the hook, and FHA and VA now acquire that property as theirs. And so that's what the VA doesn't finance, FHA doesn't finance. They provide insurance in the event of foreclosure of the borrower. So that's what that's for there. Additional financing amount. Okay, do we have any questions? I know I skipped past that kind of quick. Good, moving along. Okay. Additional finance amount, we don't use that very often. That's the second mortgages. Back in the subprime day, we had 80% first, 20% second mortgage, 100% financing. That's where that would be filled out. So if it was, it would look like this, right? We don't use that very often. It can happen. You can get a second mortgage, but it's rare. So we'll leave it at that. Okay, then this all should add up. Purchase price total should add up here. Balance of down payment, 95,000, which is your earnest money deposit amount minus your down payment. It should equal purchase price amount. Okay. All right, moving along to seller payment to cover buyer's expenses and closing costs. If the seller was going to credit the buyer, this would be filled out. So if the buyer needed a $10,000 credit, or if the seller had indicated, hey, we're going to provide a credit towards closing costs, that's where it would be filled out here. It's really nice. They added that in. We used to have to write in this whole verbiage, and it's made it a lot easier, this new form here. So seller to credit buyer, X amount, right? For closing costs. Additional seller credit terms does not include your buyer broker compensation. If the seller maybe had indicated in MLS that the seller is going to provide a credit for termite work, or seller is going to provide a credit for the septic, I had that recently, a septic issue to be repaired. You can add that in, seller to provide, let's see, $4,000 for septic. Okay. So if they had agreed to that, then that's where that form would. We typically don't use that. So that doesn't happen very often. It can happen. If there were some kind of outside thing, then you would fill it in there. Otherwise, we don't really see that very often. Kind of rarely we see that. Seller credit is more common, especially in this market right now. It's shifting into a buyer's market from a seller's market. So we are seeing more of those credits. Okay, seller's payment to compensate buyer's broker. Be sure to put this in here. Be sure to add in your amount. Do not leave it blank. We've had it happen before. And then you have to go back and ask to be compensated. Now, I put 3%. The reason why, I don't know if any of you were at the team meeting last week when we had Meritage Homes came out and they talked about the new construction. They offer 3%. So be sure to add in your BRBC. I know we're not covering BRBC right now, but when we're covering BRBC, when we create our BRBC with our client, okay, make sure that you put 3%, because if they do purchase a new home construction and you only have 2% in your BRBC for compensation, you can't get that 1% that, say, Meritage Homes is now going to offer. That goes back to your client. So they're willing to offer it, but if you don't have it in your BRBC, you have to then, that money goes back to your client. You don't get the full compensation. And so when you're doing your buyer representation agreement, compensation agreement, be sure to add in that full percent. So I kind of misspoke at the start going over this, but this percentage here can be negotiated. Okay. So if you've talked to the listing agent and they've indicated maybe that you'll get, 2.5%. If they've indicated that, you can add it in here. If not, okay, then the amount here is going to be whatever you've decided with your client. If it's 2.5%, so what I say, my compensation is 2.5%. I put in 2.5% here. The seller can do a counter offer. They can counter that out to 2%. But you can add your amount in here. Just be sure to add the amount. You can add in 3%. I will say this 3% is less common unless it's like I said, the new construction, how they said, hey, we're going to offer 3%. It's less common. Standard, not standard. I don't want to say use language standard. Customary, and what we see across the board is anywhere from 2% to 3% is compensation that we see here. So you can add that amount in there. Okay. We don't really use these all that often unless it was all cash. Okay. And these are templates. So they're already added in. So we don't have to essentially do a whole lot to fill in these forms. This whole portion is filled out for us. So there's really nothing that you need to do unless you're adding in additional things. And so it is already standard. Loan contingency, 17 days, investigation property, 17 days, informational access to property, 17 days. All of these items are already pre-filled out for us. If you go into strategy with talking with your and talking with your client, talking with the lender, talking with your coach, these can change. You can shorten them if the seller, if you're trying to be aggressive and like, hey, you know what? We'll remove them in 10 days. We have a full loan approval. You can shorten them. If not, then this is just a standard time frame, which this aligns also with the 30-day close of escrow as well. So I do want to touch real quickly on pre-qualification, pre-approval, fully underwritten pre-approval. Before you write an offer, I will say this, don't write an offer if you only have a pre-qualification, okay? You need a pre-approval or a fully underwritten pre-approval. A pre-qualification is this. The lender, say the buyer is say they are a police officer. They're a police officer and they've worked at the job for 15 years. They make X amount of dollars. So they go to the bank and they say, hey, look, I want to buy a house. What do I qualify for? And they're like, oh, okay, let's see. You've been on the job. Yes, you have a pretty good job. Let me pull your credit. They do a soft pull. Oh, great. You have an 800 credit score. And okay, this is the amount of money you make. Perfect. You're pre-qualified. It looks good. It looks good on the surface that based on your job, you're W-2'd with a long-term job, good credit score, this amount of income. Cool. Pre-qualified, right? Pre-approval is you get all of the pay stubs. Okay, wait a minute, police officer. How come your 2025 W-2s only shows, 20,000 in income? What happened? Oh, well, I was off work because I got injured on the job. Okay, so what does your current look like? Well, I'm still on, limited duty and I'm getting some disability. Okay, I'm going to go back to work next month. Okay, sorry, police officer, you are not pre-approved based on this. And so that's the distinction between a pre-qual and a pre-approval, because things can change when you start looking at pay stubs and bank statements and pulling all of the information. That's what you do on a pre-approval. A pre-qual is basically a credit pull, kind of verifying what their job is and yeah, based on this, great, you have a great credit score, you have a good job history, fantastic. But then the pre-approval looks at, okay, well, oh yeah, I was hurt 2024. Okay, well, you don't qualify any longer. You're not pre-approved. You'd have to come back next year, maybe, until once you get your income up and once you're back on the job, right? So that's just an example of the difference between pre-qual and pre-approval and why it's important. Now, fully underwritten pre-approval is when they've looked at everything. So they have the bank, meaning the bank, when I say they. So that police officer has they pulled their credit, they provide 2 years tax returns, bank statements, W-2s, all of the information. They package it up, it goes to the underwriter. The underwriter looks and says, yes, you're fully approved. All we need is a letter of explanation of this why you paid off this credit card or whatever, right? That's a fully underwritten pre-approval. That means that there's going to be no surprises. We're only waiting for the appraisal and the property condition, right? Aside from that, borrower's good to go. So that's what the difference between a pre-qual, pre-approval, fully underwritten pre-approval. Do not write offers, show property. You can show property in pre-qual. Don't go write an offer if you only have a pre-qualification. Make sure that they are pre-approved, that the lender has taken a look at, that they can qualify. Because a pre-qual is, just a preliminary based on information you gave me, looks like it can work. Okay. All right. We talked about this. Verification of condition. That's our final walkthrough, 5 days prior to close of escrow. I always leave that in standard. I leave most of this information depending on the offer. You can leave it all in here. It's all filled out for us. If there is no loan contingent, I don't recommend doing this. Loan or appraisal, that means that you're essentially that $5,000 earnest money deposit. If you say you have no loan contingency and no appraisal contingency, yes, it's being aggressive. Yes, you're being, competitive with the offer, but it's really not doing a service for your clients to have them waive those, because that's saying, we don't care what it appraises for. We're going to take it regardless, and they can pay over the amount if it doesn't appraise. We saw a lot of that in 2020 when the market was crazy. A lot of these waiving of appraisal contingencies, and then they would have to pay over the amount of what it appraised for in order to keep the house, in order to close on the contract. Because if the lender is saying we're only going to finance at 500,000, well, the appraisal came in at 490. So now they're only going to finance up to 490. So then the buyer now has to pay that difference of $10,000 in order to purchase the home. So because it's only worth this, the bank's like, oh, we're not going to finance over the amount of what the property is worth. So don't write those in. This here, yeah, that it's releasing all contingencies. Sometimes in cash deals, they might do this. But again, before you write something like that, talk to your coach or talk to me if you have any questions about that. Okay, this one could come up potentially if your buyer has to sell their home in order to purchase this home, right? You click that there, and the COP, it automatically attaches. So it's contingent on them selling their property. Because if they don't sell the property, maybe they don't have the down payment amount, or they don't need two houses, right? Because they're selling their primary house, they're moving into a bigger house, so they need the funds from that house, and they need that to sell in order to purchase a replacement property. So be sure that that box is marked there. Okay, time of possession. So once this is further on. So once we close escrow, or once we're getting ready to close escrow, the property automatically transfers ownership when it records. And so when we say on record, that is when the property officially is now your buyer's. And so so the time of possession is upon recording unless specified. So if they need until 6 p.m. of that date, if the seller does, then you can mark there, or you can just leave it blank upon recording. So as soon as ownership transfers, your buyers have possession, unless something else, and that would be marked there. Or say they need a couple, this is not uncommon, they need a week to move because they need the funds from this property in order to pay a down payment on another property, and that has to close and they have to move. And so it's not uncommon that the seller does stay in possession a couple days after the close of escrow. So that's not uncommon. You will see this often. Be very, very careful if you go over 30 days. So if you have a couple days, the seller in possession form, not unusual, it's fine. What your buyer is saying is they're giving the seller a license to remain in the property. So they're not creating tenancy, they're creating a license to stay. It's very much similar to Airbnb or when somebody rents, a hall for a party. So they have a license to be there. They don't have tenant rights or occupancy. Okay. There's no landlord-tenant agreement there, relationship. Now, if you go over 30 days here, if they're like, they need a month to move out, you're creating tenancy. So now they are a landlord. So now your first-time home buyer is first-time home buyer and a landlord. So just be very careful when you go over the 30 days. Again, a couple days, not uncommon, not unusual, but over that creates tenancy. So just remember that as well. If they're purchasing an investment property and it's a tenant occupied property, you will mark there. Okay, documents, fees for compliance, delivery of documents. So the seller has 7 days to get after acceptance to get you all the disclosures, reports, and any investigations that they do have, any reports that they have. And then these are the timeframes here. Typically, we leave them. I don't usually, and it's not typical that you would change any or amend any of the timeframes here. Okay. Any questions before we move on to this? Cool. Okay. Items included and excluded. So this is also why I like to have my MLS up at the same time I'm doing the offer, because maybe I've showed them 5 houses that day and I can't remember, is there a dishwasher? And so I like to, and then it'll trigger my memory. Yes, there was a dishwasher. And then I look at the pictures on MLS. Yes, this was included here. Okay, because this is where we add in things that are going to stay or leave. Okay. If and this is again, this is a conversation that you have with your client as well. And so you ask them, hey, do you want the washer and dryer to stay? Do you want the refrigerator to stay? What do you want to ask? A lot of times in MLS, you'll see that they indicate refrigerator to convey or refrigerator does not stay. They sometimes will indicate if it's going to stay or not ahead of time. So you can ask for whatever. There's not really a standard way or one way or another. It just really depends on if they want to leave it or not, or if your clients want it or not. Maybe they have like one of those amazing refrigerators that have like the, you know, the screen where it says what's in the refrigerator and they don't want the refrigerator, so they're going to exclude it. So it just really depends on the client, on the property. Maybe there is none. If there's no washer, no dryer in there, then it would be marked. Then it would be unchecked if there's no washer or dryer and they don't want it to remain. What is oops, I marked that. What is automatically marked, so stoves, ovens, anything permanently affixed to the property is considered like part of the property. So for example, if it's a freestanding microwave that's just on the counter, it's not necessarily going to stay with the property. If it's built in and built in with the hood, then it is going to convey with the property. But I always like to mark every single thing that I see on MLS, that I remember from my notes, that I remember from my mental notes or the notes I took down when we were viewing the property. And then you can ask your client too, hey, do you have a electric car? Do you need that the EV, charging station to stay? Right? You can ask them like, no, I don't have a car. Okay, well then then you can add it here, exclude EV charging. Excluded above ground pool. So you can exclude anything or include things here. And again, just depending on the property. Additional items included, maybe there's a spa and it's above ground, or it's an above ground spa, so it's unclear. And so then you could ask if they want the spa to stay, then they would click here and mark here that they want the spa to stay. Or if they want it gone because they have small kids and it's a hazard, they say exclude items, then you could add that here. But these are conversations to have with the client, and then also looking back at your notes and looking at MLS to see what items are included or excluded there. Okay, allocation of costs. So who pays for what? Now, it is standard that the seller does pay for a NHD report. The reason why it's standard that the seller does pay for the NHD report is because by law, this applies to all sellers, even TDS exempt sellers, which are like the trusts and these flip properties. They are required to provide a natural hazard disclosure report and includes tax information. So they have to provide, the FEMA information. If it's in a fire zone, earthquake zone, flooding, all the information by law, they have to require it. And so we make sure that the seller pays for it. It's fairly inexpensive. So it's not, buyer typically does not pay for that. If there were other reports, then we can add that there. If you have a strong preference of an NHD report, you can put it here. I always like to, as the buyer, because I'm I want something, right? I want my client's offer to get accepted. We're asking for something. And so I tend to write my offers depending on, the market and the property, et cetera, in favor and make it easy for the listing agent, for the seller. So more than likely, the listing agent already has an NHD report. So they probably have done their due diligence and they have it, or they have a company that they're used to using. They have an account set up, just like I do, and they order reports, the same reports every time from the same company, and they like them, right? So more than likely, they already have an NHD report. So I, as the buyer's agent, I don't want to make it harder on the listing agent because I want them to accept my offer. So I'm like, hey, I'll give and take based on some small things, right? Price, no. Other things, no. Small things like this to sweeten the deal a little bit where it doesn't make a difference, yes. And so I'll put seller's choice in here. You can request your own if you want to, or if the buyer's like, I want it from this my NHD or property disclosure source, JCP, LGC. I want it from there. Of course, you can ask for it. But standard is just seller's choice. Here's an option here. Additional reports. This would be if you wanted to ask for a termite report, roof report, anything like that can go in here. You don't have to put it in there. So it's not required. Anything in the report, anything that's listed in the report, the lender will see, and the lender and title will require that all of these terms are met, right? Before they will close escrow before. So if you, I will put in, if I have a VA buyer, I will automatically put termite in here, and I let the listing agent know that termite report is required because in order for VA to fund, we need a home that's free of active infestation. So we need Section 1 clearance. I'll add that in there because I make it abundantly clear that this is a condition of them purchasing the home, right? Aside from that, you don't have to put anything in there. You can order all reports and inspections after. So it doesn't have to be disclosed in the purchase offer, what reports you're getting. You can have a discussion with your client after, say your offer gets accepted. You can have a discussion with your client and say, hey, what reports do you want to get? Let's talk about this. The roof looked like it had, some green kind of moss on it, right? Or, hey, the seller said that they have a brand new roof. Like whatever the case may be, you can get all kinds of reports. If they say, look, there's trees outside, and I know these trees that the roots could be going into the sewer, and I want to get that checked out. Yep, you can order those additional disclosures. You don't have to put it in the contract. If you put it in, rule of thumb, you put in the contract, now lender, title, everybody knows that you have to abide by these, and they'll ask for the reports. It is much cleaner not to, but there are circumstances, and like I said, when I want it to be added in because I need to get something done, right? I'm kind of making it clear, hey, seller, we want the house, but this is a condition of closing. We can't close unless we have this. And so I make sure that they know, that way it doesn't come up later. They're like, oh, we're not paying for termite. Well, I wrote in the contract, it's VA, we have to have it done. So on that circumstances, when I do make it clear and I add it in. Aside from that, you don't have to list any reports that you're doing. You can do them, order whatever reports and inspections that you like, that you and your client decide on. Doesn't have to be added in. Seller, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, water heater bracing. That's not uncommon that the seller does provide all of that. Let's see, escrow fee. Each pay their own. And again, this is another one of those that, yeah. So escrow fee and owner's title insurance policy, they both pay their own, each pay their own fees here, which is standard. The reason I put seller's choice is because more than likely the seller took the listing, they pre-open escrow, they said, hey, escrow company, can you pull a payoff demand? I have to do my net sheet. I have to tell the seller how much they're going to get to close, based on this price. So they've already done work up front. More than likely, they've already pre-open escrow, escrow's done work. They have preliminary title report, right? They've done all this work in advance. And so then for us to come along and say, hey, can you switch companies? It's not really convenient for the seller. So it's customary that we say a seller's choice. You can ask for it to be a different company. It's up to you. I've had it both ways. We've asked for it because my buyer's like, hey, I'm selling this property. I purchased a bunch with this escrow company. I really like this escrow officer. I don't want anyone else touching my, and this is the truth. I had an investor that was like, I need this company, this escrow officer. I don't want to deal with anybody else. And so we've added that in as a condition, but seller's choice is customary. County transfer tax, sellers pay, that's customary there. Check your city before. There are no cities in Sacramento County that have a city transfer tax. But if it's a city that you're not familiar with, or a city that you've never sold a property in, just be sure to check if there is a city transfer tax. It's not really common. So San Joaquin, Stanislaus County, Sacramento County do not have cities within those counties that have a transfer tax fee. County transfer tax, yes, they all have county transfer tax and the seller pays, and that's what's customary. Seller pays for HOA fee for preparing disclosures, and the buyer pays for the HOA certification fee, which is standard. They already have it filled out in there. If there are any HOA transfer fees, it's not really common. Some of the if you'll see like a luxury type complex, sometimes they will have move and move out fees, but it's not really common. It's kind of uncommon. If there were private transfer fees, which we don't run into that either one requesting that a whole lot either. And again, here, additional fees or costs, if there's anything else that's needed, it would go in here. Home warranty. This is one of those items that it can be either one. So it can be part of your negotiation if you are if you want you have a discussion with your buyer. I highly recommend that they get a home warranty. It makes it a lot easier when you close escrow and you get the call. It's like, hey, my dishwasher is not working. And you say, okay, too bad. You don't want to tell your client too bad, but also we're not contractors or handyman. We can't go fix the dishwasher. So what do you do? So the best way is have your client get a home warranty. And so when the calls come after, because they do, because they're houses and things happen, because that's life, they say, hey, my dishwasher's broken. Lisa, what do I do? Hey, I have your home warranty info right here. It's covered. You have to pay your your service fee for them to come out and take a look at it, but it's covered under the warranty. Here you go. And I send the warranty information. That is the best way to do it. It's the biggest peace of mind that I have after closing escrow. Yep, here's your home warranty info. Fantastic. And call the home warranty, because we as agents, we want to do so much for our clients, but then what do? Right? My garage door is not working. I can't go fix your garage door, but I can say call your home warranty. So I highly recommend that there. Either one, buyer or seller. So there's not really, in this one, it's not really a customary one. You can add standard ones do not have air conditioning. They just have the basics. So if they had a pool, HVAC and pool, those are add-ons. So I always add those on here. But I'll take that off. And it's up to you, buyer or seller, depending on the overall offer, depending on the buyer, depending on the seller, depending on the property. So, okay. And other terms here say that that you want the seller to pay for, your termite work, right? Or Section 1 clearance, or sellers maybe had discussion with the listing agent front, it needs a new roof, then you would put that in the contract, seller to provide a new roof at close of escrow, right? Whatever it is, you can add that in here. Okay, any questions? Okay, moving along here. Property addendum, any of these, what we marked based on the first couple of pages will apply here. So if there were if it was a short sale, if that was a tenant occupied property addendum. So anything that we kind of discussed earlier on in the contract, the first few pages of the contract, um, will be transferred over here, or you can add them here. If there was an additional addendum where you had to write something outside, it could be added here. We don't usually use a lot of these. These are all kind of on a case by case basis. And so you're not going to see a whole needing to use a whole lot of these. Okay. The ones that are automatically marked here are what's automatically populated in zip forms when you go to and you write the contract. Buyer investigation advisory is automatically attached. Wire fraud advisory automatically attached. Fair housing discrimination advisory automatically attached. Consumer Privacy Act, probate advisory. I don't know why that was marked. It's not probate. REO advisory, or I need to unmark those. So these are already marked in here. Okay. The REO is not. I think I had it marked from another training, but they automatically carry over because they are required forms. So you have, when you send over your residential purchase agreement for signature, it starts out with agency is the first form. So you'll see a bunch of attached forms, which is nice because it's all the required documents that we needed that attached to that purchase agreement. So the rest of the contract goes into detail regarding terms, regarding deposit, that's the earnest money deposit. It goes into detail about what happens if we don't agree to that, who keeps the deposit, right? If it's a cash offer, loan amount. I want to talk about, let's see, questions I get a lot. And this is kind of good to note. The condition of property at closing. So the property should be in the same condition as it was on the day that you looked at the property. So one of the most common things that we see is the pool was blue when we looked at it, seller moved out, or maybe tenant moved out, right? Seller was out of state. Now the pool's green, right? They didn't take care of it, or the grass died, or the grass is now long. Okay, so the seller has to keep the property in the same condition. So they can't say, well, too bad, it's your problem. No. So that's when we do the final walkthrough, at least 5 days prior to close. That way we can see that the property is in the same condition. When you do your final walkthrough with your client, it's not to negotiate new terms or say, hey, this actually, I want this fixed. No, it's just to look and make sure the house is there, to make sure it's in, similar condition, the same condition as it was when you did your initial walkthrough. This talks about the seller remaining in possession after the close of escrow, so the SIP, contingencies, removal of contingencies, talking about that a little bit. Be sure that when the time does come to remove the contingencies, that means all your investigations are complete. Their loan is fully approved and they're good to go. The property condition is great. Everything looks good about the property. The appraisal's in. There's no conditions on the appraisal. Appraisal's in at 500,000. Property condition's great. There's no termite. The roof is fantastic. This doesn't happen often though. I mean, just being honest, we usually have things that come up, but if there is, right, they go to remove their contingencies, they have to physically sign off saying that their deposit is now potentially non-refundable. I say potentially because it could get tied up in arbitration, mediation. There could be issues if they cancel for any reason, because what they're saying to the seller is, yes, we are moving forward and now our deposit is non-refundable. That way, if the buyer defaults, they're saying the seller can retain the deposit potentially. And so just be sure when you are going over the contingency removal, make sure that everything is okay, right? If there's don't remove the contingencies if there's questions about the appraisal, if you're still doing investigations, because then the deposit is now non-refundable. Um, this talks about the waiver contingencies with offer, which I said don't do. Talks about the risk of that there. This goes into items included in the sale. So all existing fixtures and fitting that are attached to the property. Remember, I was talking about the difference between the microwave that's attached and built in versus the microwave on the just on the countertop. So it's anything that's affixed to the property. Electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, heating fixtures, ceiling fans, fireplace inserts, gas logs, grates, etc. So it goes into detail there of what's included or excluded from the sale. So I had this question come up regarding the inspections and reports. Buyer is required to provide copies of all inspections and reports to the seller within 3 days after the investigation. So people have not wanted to give it to the seller because they're like, okay, now if we cancel, now the seller can go and say, and the buyer's paying for these, right? So there is a little bit of there is some merit to why agents think that the buyers own those inspections because they paid for them. So your clients paid $1,000 for all of these inspections to get done, and then they walk away. The seller now has those reports, and then they can go and negotiate with a potential buyer based on these reports. And so it does seem like a little off there. But the purpose for that is they're trying to avoid non-disclosure on the seller's part for the future buyer, meaning the seller now knows about the property, so they're obligated now if there's any defects on the property, now it obligates them to disclose to a future buyer. And so yes, the buyer does not, they're required to provide the disclosures or any reports over to the seller. So if you write it, when you write your request for repairs, attach all the inspections and reports, and then send them over to the listing agent. I think that was it. Let me see if there's any other things that I want to touch on here. I feel like there was one more. Okay, I think that, oh, I did want to touch on seller right to cancel. Seller doesn't have a right to cancel. So it's just the buyer. The buyer's the only party in this that can cancel. And the only way that the seller can cancel is if the buyer doesn't perform. That's the only way the seller can cancel. The seller can't cancel if the buyer has fully performed. So okay, do we have any questions? We have a couple minutes left for questions. If anyone wants to hop in. Okay. All right, guys. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.